And there, we are recording. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Defense Politics Asia, the Open Mic channel. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by faces that are familiar to some of you, and you are fortunate to be familiarized with over the course of this recording. Today, we are going to be actually discussing the Ukraine war from a military perspective, mostly, and it's going to be battle tactics, it's going to be strategy, it's going to be all the things that pan out when unfortunate events like war occur. And, you should understand this before I continue. We are not here to lecture you. We are regular dudes from across the world with various degree of expertise. We have professions, or we have times and interests. This is what really makes the open mic. And so, from Wyatt's impeccable reporting on the Ukraine war, and other wars for that matter, but mainly this war, it has attracted this community that we have now, which is now going to be continuing the discussion on the Ukraine war from a variety of perspectives. Archimedes, please take the lead.
Hey everybody, so I just want to go ahead and introduce our panel here. We've got Thank You Coping, we've got Alan, we've got Dee, we've got Vaun, we have Rue, and I think Doug might be joining us in a few minutes if he can get his audio and video working. So we'll see if he jumps in. So the structure of today's panel is going to basically be a chronological history of the Ukraine war, starting from February, I think what it was, 23rd of 2022 up till today. We're going to broadly be talking about the 5 different phases of the war. The first phase, as you can see right here with the map that we have up here. Beautiful map, by the way. This is Wyatt's Defense Politics Asia map that is available if you are a paying member to Wyatt. So please go ahead and do that if you want access to all the archival maps with the best detail. There we go. We've got Doug now. So the first phase of the war is going to be when Russia initially invaded. As you can see, there's an attack straight from the north towards Kiev. There's attacks in the south coming out of Crimea. There's attacks in the east, of course, in the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. And there was a great deal of success initially for Russia, but then a great deal of failure as well, as Russia ended up having to withdraw from Kiev. Moving on from there, we're going to go back to this in a little bit, but I just want to go ahead and give you the rundown on all 5 of the phases. The second phase, of course, is the Kharkiv and Kherson counteroffensives, where Ukraine destroyed a lot of Russian units around Kharkiv and went ahead and took a lot of land. Russia withdrew from the right bank of the Dnieper River, and so then we're going to talk about that section. The third is the battle around Bakhmut, around Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and Popasna. And that went on throughout the entire winter of the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023. A lot of Wagner involved in there. The fourth phase is going to be Ukraine's counteroffensive in the spring/summer of 2023 with all of the vaunted NATO equipment, all their gains around Robotine, going towards Tokmak, and of course reaching Crimea by the summer. Which summer, I'm not sure, but it's going to be there soon enough, I'm sure. And finally, where we are today, where the counteroffensive seems to have stopped, and we'll see where we go from there. So those are going to be the 5 phases. We're going to go ahead and get started with the first phase, the initial Russian assault on Kiev, on Kherson, on Kharkiv, in many different directions. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that out to the panel. Let's go ahead and discuss what happened there in February of 2022.
I mean, I can start us off. With access to this map, I can actually take us day by day through the first 2.5 weeks of the conflict. What you're seeing here is initially Wyatt's original reporting on day 1. Within the first 24 hours of the conflict, a lot of people will remember, if you guys can see me zooming in here to Kiev, there was a very infamous landing, right, within the first early morning hours north of Kiev, at the Gostomel airport, or Hostomel airport, if you pronounce it in Ukrainian, where basically the Russians supposedly misjudged a landing, an airborne landing, through their VDV forces, and essentially saw themselves wiped out, or at least surrounded for several days, which some people have speculated was going to be a launching point for a full-on assault against the capital city of Kiev. And other people have speculated that was a diversionary attack that was basically purely meant to keep the Ukrainian forces in the north of the country. If you guys can see me zoom out here, the goal was to basically keep Ukrainian military personnel in the north while the Russian advance in the south advanced up towards Kherson, towards Melitopol, as well as far as Mariupol from Crimea. But if you guys have any other views on that, I'd love to hear them.
I don't really think that the initial air assault was a failure. They took the airfield, and the problem they had was they couldn't push out the perimeter far enough to allow like more aircraft to come in and bring in more supplies. And if you look at the area, it's pretty much in the woods, where Kiev is, and north of Kiev, and in the beginning, that's where all the Ukrainian military was. So, after they got over the initial shock, the paratroopers were, pretty far out extended. So they were surrounded, and they did take casualties. They took a lot of casualties. They got pushed out because they had to leave because, there was no way to stay there anymore. It was untenable. But I don't really think it was a failure in that sense. I just think, they got in there, the mission was successful, but then the follow through is where it fell apart. They didn't link up with ground forces. They weren't able to expand the bridgehead, basically. So, when they decided to pull out, that's when they started pulling out, all across the north. I mean, I still think it was a high risk, high reward. It was part of the bluff, when they were trying to get Ukraine to maybe go to the negotiating table right off the bat. Because if they had gotten in there, taken the airfield, been able to start landing, brigades every day, then Ukraine might have been like, okay, we'll negotiate. But since that didn't happen, and obviously the United States and everybody else said they were going to support them fully, then, they had to leave. And I also think I don't know if it was a second, planned, but a secondary benefit is that by them doing that and having all those forces up north, it did split the Ukrainians, which has been a pretty common theme throughout the war as it's progressed. It's getting to the point where the Ukrainians can't keep subdividing units and reserves and putting them all over the map to start to counter what's starting to happen now. But even back then, you could see where the Russians took advantage of their ability to split the Ukrainian forces.
I think, for the most part, if you go into the map, you can see a divided Russian intelligence and a divided strategy from the Russians. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, you have the southern push from Kherson to unite with Donetsk and unite a land bridge. And then you have a kind of a blitz tactic that was a very high risk, high reward bet that some Russian generals probably wanted to do. And they had some forces given to them and say, try it out. And if you fail, you're still holding some enemy forces in the area. And you can always just retreat back into Russia or Belarus and then redeploy after. And what we saw is the bet have worked. The BDV units, the paratroopers in the army, just send them a point, take it, hold it. If you die, you die. If you take it and you hold enough until reinforcements arrive, mission accomplished, either way. So they're more expendable troops in terms of a tactics perspective. You don't expect them to survive too long. In reality, their casualty rates for them are expected to be more than 50% in many operations, such as this. So it's they threw themselves knowing more than half of them would die, basically. But the tactic worked in a way. They pulled reserves from Kiev. They couldn't push back in Kherson. They couldn't push back in Kharkiv. Sumy was surrounded, so most of the big cities near Kiev were surrounded, and they needed to redeploy units from Ukraine to hold that front and stop them from surrounding Kiev, basically. And that allowed the Russians to make the land bridge between Kherson and Russia and Donetsk and connect them.
Yep. Also, coping, I'm ready to switch the map to the following month's map, just so we can have a little bit more of a full image. You might have to repin that. Can you go ahead and get ready to do that?
It actually starts as unpinned, so this is I'm hoping it's gonna just
okay. So just quick little reshare. I'm gonna reshare this second right there. All right. Hopefully you all see it now.
And the screen, it says on my screen, the screencast is pinned. So let's just hope it is.
Perfect. Cool.
By the 27th, the airborne, ground connection had already been established. There's video evidence of this, where there's airborne troops like showing all of these tankers and everything else coming in. So that's like 4 days. Okay, they held out. Yeah, they got their, whatever, they fought hard for Gostomel. But we've also learned that the Ukrainians, like one of their bunkers they were supposed to put all of their leadership in was in Gostomel. So this isn't just, a feint from the Russians that, made, no sense, and they lost all their VDV. Like, I'm not accepting that. No. The VDV connected within 72 hours, and there was a chance of capturing that guy who's already been removed from the defense ministry. Like he said, I was supposed to bunker in at Hostomel. So okay, yeah, it failed to do what they wanted, but if it had happened, it would have been amazing. It would have been a military, you and all of us would have been saying wow, this is amazing. They captured the defense minister on the first day, et cetera, et cetera. No one can deny that. Okay, it failed. And they switched into attrition warfare. And that's what we're seeing now.
As you guys can see on the map, I have just displayed what major event occurred on the period between March 31st and April 3rd, which is the almost entire abandonment or tactical retreat, or some people would argue, which I also agree with because the evidence supports it, the purposeful giving up of the Russian holdings in northern Ukraine due to the treaty that was on the table in Turkey between the Russians and the Ukrainians, where the Russians basically made the move of giving up northern Ukraine to solidify their permanent holdings that they had at the time, where we also saw a visit from one Boris Johnson to Turkey during the negotiations, where suddenly the following day, not only did the negotiations fall through, but once the Russians had left, it allowed the Ukrainians to consolidate their lines and force the Russians to appear to have lost strategically within the first month. Now, some people say this is in bad faith. Some people say the West saw Russia was in a weak position, and they tried to capitalize on that by basically saying, we will back Ukraine with the blankest of blank checks possible. And now you can see where we are today. We're still in a war. Hundreds of thousands, if not more than 500,000 Ukrainians are dead because of this single decision right here on March 31st, April 1st of 2022, when this conflict, we need to emphasize this as importantly as possible, this conflict could have been over. And as you can see today, it is still raging on.
Okay, can I say something?
Please do.
I think it was DS which said or coping about a blitzkrieg, and that it was coming from a lot of directions, and it hinted on two presumptions. It was not like a unified strategy. I think that's a very good take, but also blitzkrieg usually has one point of effort. Schwerpunkt in German, and you can see from five directions that try to invade the country, and the problem is that only one half succeeded, meaning that, of course, they made the land bridge, but I mean, the most important thing was the Kherson bridgehead, in my opinion, because it crossed the Dnieper River, which is a major obstacle, but also there was a major failure, and that was the not taking Kharkov, the second city of Ukraine, which is just across the border. I mean, yeah, let's say this, there were successes, like the crossing at Kherson, which was almost a textbook operation, in my opinion, went very well. And the Ukrainians were also kind of impressed, because you should know that the Crimea border was really fortified. So to go through there and cross the Kherson bridge over the Dnieper was really a major success, in my opinion. But Kharkov, on the other hand, with the first Guards Tank Army, was a really shit show. So mixed results. Let's say like this.
What do you think the first Guards Tank Army is still doing to this day? Do you think they've been redeployed?
Yeah, it's just a name, of course. I mean, how many tanks are really in? And second, how many units are under there? I don't know. I didn't follow it lately too much in sense of like order of battle. But what I think, but maybe we're going ahead too much, is that Russia is going to sit it out unless there's a window of opportunity which opens, meaning that Ukraine will have a major setback in terms of like the energy. Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, I think the First Guards Tank Army is deployed up around Kupiansk area, between Kupiansk and Kremenaya.
Yeah, there's where it is, but the point is that it's a name. It's First Guard Tank Army.
Oh, I know. I'm just saying. I mean, but if that's the same unit, you know, they've probably been reconstituted and rotated back in, but maybe they're just waiting, like you said, to see what happens.
Yeah, it's just that the Germans also used to have tank armies, and at first they were consistent of tanks, but later in the war they were just commands, if you know what I mean. So I don't know whether the Guards Tank Army is still a tank army in the sense that it has a purpose to really have like this kind of big, deep deployment of tanks. I don't know. Perhaps we have seen around Kupiansk a lot of movement this year of Russian troops that really have been pushing. But so far, no dramatic developments in that sector.
Ru, what do you think was the reason that that Russia failed to capture Kharkov in the initial assault?
Yeah, maybe. My opinion is that they thought it would be easy, that the Ukrainian army would be shocked by the mere fact that Russia would intervene so openly, and they would just kind of collapse or don't resist too much, or because the same with Kiev, you know, they because Putin said in his speech like, oh, please don't go out of your barracks, we're not against Ukraine or you, we're just against the government. So that he really kind of hoped that they would heed his call and not resist, and the Ukrainians decided to resist. Yeah, that's something which you can only know when you actually do it.
Yeah, it sounds like a major failure of intelligence led to the failures that the Russians had in the initial assault. But at the same time, you have to admit that the Russians had a great deal of success as well. I mean, if you look at the entire region of southern Ukraine, going from that region around Melitopol all the way to Mariupol and Donetsk, all of that was captured by Russia, and that secured the land bridge to Crimea
within a week.
Exactly.
Yeah,
now, except for, of course, Mariupol.
Consolidated it out within about a month, where it was.
That's right. Yeah, the only thing.
And if you think about it, within a month and a half of the end of the beginning of the war, from that point on, that's when they started building those fortifications. And to think the Ukrainians were stupid enough to go after the place that has probably had the longest time to prepare. I mean, it's like another bad decision.
You're talking about the fortifications here near Zaporozhye.
Yeah, before we move on to there, gentlemen, I just want to make you guys clear, unlike the StreamYard on Open Mic, it's not really apparent if someone is holding up the finger or trying to speak and so forth. So try to be a little bit apprehensive of that. I know Felipe was holding his finger up. He wanted to respond to that. I had something I wanted to respond to, Ru, before we move on from Kharkiv. Because the one thing was what you said that, maybe the Russians would expect that the Ukrainians would just collapse just because the Russian presence would occur. But would you know if the Ukrainians had a good reason to assume that they would actually be able to withhold? Because as far as I know, considering the civil war having going on for like 8 years, I'm not so surprised that they will be having a heavy military presence where their directives were to be clear. Here, you hold the line. And so, yeah, like, what would you say on that regard? Did the Ukrainian, because it seems that the Ukrainians clearly were able to hold. So did they have a material basis to psychologically maintain, in contrary to to your statement, just to play the devil's advocate, if you know what I mean.
Yes. I mean, the way the Russians entered into the country a lot of times was very brazen in terms like they just went through the customs post and it just advanced like on a normal road. It didn't. It was really kind of like almost like a peacetime exercise. So let's say like this. I think that in the initial 2 days or something like that, there was a lot of confusion. And but I also think that as soon as footage came in that the Russians were being attacked and they were burning tanks, then a lot of people kind of like get their act together and started resisting, let's say like this. I don't think from the very first day. I mean, I think everybody was shocked. I mean, even the Russians themselves to some extent. But I mean, I think there must have been some kind of like psychological change in terms like, because from the first day, also the stories came out like the ghost of Kiev, and they did a lot of propaganda work to really make the Ukrainians resist, like that they had a fair chance to resist, and they were successful. And to some extent, of course, they were. I mean, they were attacking Russians, and the Russians were also surprised to be attacked, to be honest, because you could see the tank column in Brovary, for example. They just went in and suddenly they were attacked, and there was only chaos. It was really not so a good show for the Russian army. They were apparently not really prepared for resistance.
Yeah, I think I could say for the whole why they lost the Kiev and they focus more on the Kherson land bridge is mainly because of the forces allocated in a more strategic level. They only went in with 300k, ish, 300 to 400k.
240.
Yeah, if you count reserves, logistical goods is like 300-ish k. Could be a bit less at the start, and then it moved a bit up because you need to maintain the roads and construct and move more logistical goods. But with that many people, you have to make choices. So they make a big bet for Kiev and then Kherson. They say, okay, let's try and get Kiev in the first couple of days, but it's not sustainable. They knew, at least they should have known, long term, unless they pulled another 100,000 or even 200,000, the landmass they took in Kiev and the Sumy was impossible to maintain. Why? They only moved them through main roads. They could not take any cities. Sumy was under siege for I don't know how long, and they didn't went in because they didn't have the manpower to do it. And if they went in, they would have taken huge casualties, and then the unit would be wiped. And that wasn't their main objective. So
I think the other thing too is that if you look at the objectives, the land bridge was the priority, no matter what. And you could see that's the one that went the smoothest, the quickest, and they consolidated it quick. I mean, like I said, they consolidated the area and immediately started building fortifications all the way towards Donetsk for the last year and a half.
And you could see that's actually something that wasn't even noticed for nearly 9 months.
They didn't even notice it until maybe the last 6 to 8 months.
Yeah. For 9 months
and
after.
That's where they picked to go in. And then look where they actually picked the actual attack. Like, it's like
here. We'll get to areas. We'll get there. I'll pull that map up. It'll be great.
So let's go ahead and move forward now to the summer of 2022. Now there's 3 major events here in the summer. Yeah, perfect. So we're going to go from June all the way up to about September or October. And I think there's 3 really important events here. Awesome. First of all, after the front lines kind of settled, after the Russians did withdraw from the north of Ukraine, the first thing that happened, a lot of the focus for the summer was in Donetsk, was in the Donetsk region, right?
Yeah.
Near Severodonetsk.
Feel free to tell me.
Yeah, go ahead and zoom in on Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. So let's talk about that first of all. What exactly happened there, right? Because there was a lot going on this summer where the Russians ended up advancing pretty significantly around Popasna, around Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, towards Seversk, and moving in towards Bakhmut, which we'll get to a little later. But before that, I just want to say we're going to talk a little bit about Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, and then also talk about what happened in Kharkiv and in Kherson after that. So let's first of all talk about Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and then we'll move on to those 2.
And Popasna as well.
Yeah.
I think.
So what was the significance of this operation, right? Because it's, this is one of the biggest cities that was captured by Russia, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, for quite a long time.
Before we hop on this, I think it would be right to at least mention the siege of Mariupol. What you guys think about how just a quick maybe around the panel. What do you guys think about how that went down? We don't need to go super deep into it, but what do you guys think about it?
Smooth operation, nicely cut off a lot of important forces, and very experienced troops were cut off and completely annihilated, and their command as well.
Yeah.
Even if many people say, yeah, they pulled off and stuff, you could see they really tried to get them out. I don't know, like 3 weeks or 1 week before Mariupol fell, you could see reports of down helicopters still trying to get in and get out dudes from Mariupol. And those were probably high-ranking officers that were trapped in there, and they wanted to get out because they needed that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And also a lot of foreign mercenaries were there and were captured or killed.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything DA said. I mean, they got in there, they surrounded them, they cut them off, and then they just laid siege to them. And they were bombing them with strategic bombers. They couldn't get anybody in and out. And then you hear all the stories about, like you said, foreign fighters and high-ranking people. They found the crematorium down in there, with an American passport remains. So, I mean, it feeds the whole conspiracy and mystery. But it was definitely a major victory for Russia just because, like you said, they took out so many experienced people and probably some good leadership. Because they thought that place was going to be their fucking, not Alamo, but like their fortress. They're going to hold that and direct the war from there probably.
And I think that it's still true that Mariupol is the largest city that's changed hands in this war.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. I think the second place was actually Severodonetsk and Lysychansk.
Would it not be Melitopol?
Maybe, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, maybe if you count them together, they're certainly up there. And I think that the most interesting thing about Severodonetsk to me, of course, it's a twin city on either side of the river. I think it's the river Severodonetsk, right? And or Seversky Donetsk River, right? Now, the Ukrainians held the bridgehead in Severodonetsk for a lot longer than I think that they should have. When they were cut off, when all the bridges were severed between Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, and they were feeding the troops in Severodonetsk with effectively with ferries and by fording the river where they could, and pontoon bridges, they held out in Severodonetsk for extremely long. I mean, what do you guys think that this has to say about Ukrainian military strategy?
I mean, it seems like they're into last stands. I mean, because I think I don't know if it was Lysychansk or Severodonetsk, but one of those places, I think they even blew a bridge early, either by mistake or intentionally, which fucked up things there too. I think it trapped a bunch of people in one side or the other.
Quickly,
this
was my favorite part about this.
That was probably one of the first places they ever did a hold at all costs. And then it failed, and then you got Soledar, Bakhmut, and looks like Avdiivka now.
No, this right here was probably one of my favorite reports of the fighting from the battle, because on the 5th of June, they said that they had regained all this territory in one day, and then nothing.
Oof.
Yeah.
I like how Wyatt put the little question marks there. You see that? That's a great example. That's a great example of Wyatt's reporting, right? Because he didn't just say, "Oh, they took these towns." He says, "They say they took these towns." I'm going to just put a question mark on there.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we start to see here the conflict between the military tactics and the politics that they're inside of Ukraine, because no military, like decent commander, would like to hold to a bridge-less city that's you have a couple thousand dudes in there, infantry, mechanized guys, tanks. You need the logistics. You can't hold if all the bridges are down. You just need to pull out when you can, blow the bridges and build a resistance. And they didn't do it. They just choose to stay.
South of Lysychansk, and they put a bunch of units in there, and then they kept waiting to pull them out, and they almost got cut off too. The one that was like east of the refinery area down there,
Right.
it was kind of like a big salient, and they kept holding. It's like, dude, it's like you got like a kilometer wide area to get out.
And they were showing like a rope bridge, like tow on. They were showing all these like little things as like, oh,
Yeah,
the
there was like a
resistance.
4-wheeler dragging a door with some guys sitting on it while they towed them through the mud.
exactly.
Yeah,
A couple of guys on a pontoon like raft, like pulling on a rope, and you know, anyone who's a military person knows that like you can't conduct an actual defense this way. It's like any of those troops who were like left there, they knew like, okay, you know, you've got a couple of boxes of ammo, you're dead. So.
And for a while there, the Russians were advancing pretty steadily around Severodonetsk and Lysychansk until they eventually did go ahead and capture the place. Yeah. What do you have to say, Cope?
I hope it's not too interjecting or derailing. I happen to have to put this into context because I recall this progression here, even though I'm not as into this, detail to detail as you guys is. I do definitely recall Popashna and Lysychansk, and I just came to realize, considering that it's almost a year ago, what would you say, if you could briefly, is the biggest difference between the Ukrainian army now, then, when it was facing this onslaught, and the Russian army? Because one thing that I can certainly see, like I think everyone can see, is that drones were not that prevalent. It is
that was going to be the whole thing I was going to talk about, drones.
Oh,
yeah, please take it away.
Okay, no, sorry. Then I'll just leave it there. That was really all like my It was just an observation from my side.
No, it's definitely. Oh, please go ahead. Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Just very shortly, we should take into account that the Russians had announced the second phase of the special military operation, and in their perspective, the second phase would be the securing of the Donbass. And in this perspective, the capture of Mariupol was very important, politically and militarily. But there's another caveat which is linked to Lysychansk Severodonetsk, which I captured last year in my own podcast, is that in Mariupol, the Ukrainians kind of allowed themselves to be surrounded. And in Lysychansk Severodonetsk, the leadership in Kiev wanted to have another Mariupol, kind of surrounded and kind of valiant last stand. But the Ukrainian army, the soldiers didn't allow it. They just went off. They disobeyed. They didn't allow themselves to be surrounded. And that's also very telling for how the post-Mariupol Ukrainian conduct didn't allow themselves to be surrounded anymore.
Yeah,
that's right.
Artillery war really started kicking up, because that's when we started getting all the 40,000 shells a day, or and the HIMARS started coming in the 777s.
This was right at the beginning of the HIMARS era.
I think that was really artillery war. Really.
Yep. I think as well here you can start to see the shift of Russia to true and trusted tactics, is as I would put it.
Exactly.
Before they tried something the West always did. It's like blitzkrieg. Okay, go in, show of force, secure the perimeter, change of leadership, and that's it. Yeah. It didn't work as they expected, but it wasn't their only plan. So they managed to make the land bridge, and then they say, okay, it's not working. Like it didn't work as we wanted. We're going for the long run, and now let's do what we know best and start the artillery battles, start the preparation, do small advances, and then slowly but surely grind them down until they can advance and take the ground.
Yeah. Now, I think this is a good opportunity to move forward a little bit in time and start talking about what happened in the north of Donetsk, or rather of North Luhansk and Kharkiv Oblast, which was basically an operation, a blitzkrieg-like operation by Ukraine, where, as you can see right now, Russia has control of Shevchenkoe, of Balaklia, of Izium, of Liman. That entire region there, all the way to Kupiansk, was captured by Ukraine in the matter of about, 2 weeks 3 weeks, something like that, at most.
Yep.
I mean, I remember when the news was coming in, I saw a tweet that was like, Russia has captured, or Ukraine has captured Izium. And then 2 minutes later, in the reply to the tweet, they said, no, Ukraine has captured Liman. I mean, they move forward with incredible rapidity there. So if we can, if you can go ahead and fiddle with the maps, Alan, and show us what happened there.
This was actually later in August, early September. So one moment.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. It was actually a birthday present for me. I remember that. Yeah. Yeah. And, but I mean, it was really an extraordinary thing that happened. And this is, like you said, it comes back to the difference in doctrines there. The Ukrainians were going for this blitzkrieg tactic while the Russians were retreating. And again, that's the classic Russian strategy, right? If you want to cope and say that this was just the Russians trying to retreat, you can do that. I mean, what do you guys think? What's the postmortem on this? Because I remember when this happened, it was a complete. I mean, it was the information space was absolutely
after
crazy.
The first retreat, right? Where the
look at this.
The Ukrainians basically took
for me,
territory here,
what all this
and then they launched a second offensive, which broke through a bridgehead.
Sorry,
that's all.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug. Yeah, Doug.
Doug Rout.
Did we lose everyone? Hello?
No.
No, I think.
Doug might be having audio issues, but yeah, go ahead, Rout. Or D? Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say here something happened.
Just look at how rapidly this is happening. This is day by day.
Yeah, but this is some problem the Russians had up till that point, and then they started mobilization further away, like in the future. But this point, they start to see the land they have, they cannot secure it with 200,000 men. And what do? They say, okay, Kharkov is not really one of our main goals for this operation, but Kherson, we would like to have it, right? So they redeployed some units that were in Kharkov into Kherson, and it also backfired. And they left some reserves to hold the line because they weren't sure, or they didn't believe the Ukrainians to be capable of pulling some blitzkrieg type operation like this. They believed the Ukrainians were focused on defense, and then they were mostly beaten. So their intel level, and they didn't have as good drone capability, so they weren't observing as much the troop movements. But the Ukrainians do have extremely good drone and satellite imaging provided by Western sources.
ISR. Yep.
Yeah, Western surveillance. So they knew the moment the Russians moved troops from this region to Kharkov, they said like, oh, hey, this is an opportunity. Go ahead and do your thing. And that's what they did. And they stopped at that point because they knew if they kept pushing, the Ukrainians would be overextended and then would be cut off and all the gains would be lost. But so that's why they didn't keep on pushing.
Well, and that makes sense. Like, you know, and I give it to them. Like, they took advantage of a weakness in the Russian approach, which, you know, honestly was like they tried to do this a little bit like without the right amount of troops. Now they realize like 50 nations, satellites, everything else, like, you know, you're going to have to like hold every fucking inch of, you know, territory. So.
And now you can see that it's gone back the other way because Ukraine can't keep
Exactly.
manpower up there to hold it. Plus, I mean, I'm not trying to take away from the Ukrainians capturing the land, but you know, if you look at the ISR and stuff and the availability that they had to track the Russian units, you know, they know exactly where the reserve units were, what roads were open, what weren't open. As soon as Russian units were withdrawing, they knew. So, I mean, they had hand-picked routes probably to go in there, and that's why they were able to make quick advances and have light resistance. Plus, there was already light resistance anyway. I mean, I'll get, you know, but that's the way that happened. You know, it wasn't like they came in there with so much firepower and just blew the Russians out. I mean, the Russians knew they were outgunned, so they ran away. And the ISR they had allowed them to fucking fully exploit the fleeing Russians.
We have that from English-speaking volunteers, and Rubru can probably like comment on this, but like honestly, like that one incident where there was this Russian, and they went into a building. It was a BMP, and like a couple of guys had run into the building. Yeah, and like whatever, like this is a major, and they said we brought in a tank. So what they were saying was like, we were bringing in a tank to just destroy that structure, and no one could do anything about it. And the Russians, honestly, like this comes down to economics for them. They switched in mindset from the battle, battalion tactical group to the we're going to go like whole hog on this. Like we're just going to like remove every fucking bit of this. Like is going to come down to who can produce the most, and the Russians are winning.
Yeah, I want to make one point about back in Kharkiv. If you bring the map back over there, Alan, there's a rail connection that goes through Izium and through Liman and through Bakhmut and through Donetsk that connects directly to Moscow. It goes also through Sviatohirsk, I believe. Yeah, there it is. If you see, I mean, obviously you can't see the rail here, but that rail line that is basically the main rail line that connected Donetsk to Moscow in the Soviet Union days. The Russians, we can kind of say that the Russians didn't lose that much man and materiel in this Kharkiv withdrawal because it was so lightly defended in the first place. But they did lose a pretty major strategic rail line there. And I think that they are going to have to take that back eventually before they take the rest of the Donbass. But before we move on to that, let's talk about what happened right after Kharkiv. Oh, go ahead, Ru.
Yeah, sorry. We need to look at the bigger picture a little bit, because what happened is that Ukraine mobilized a lot of men. And at first, I thought, and it was erroneously in hindsight, that they couldn't upgrade their army, that would fail. But apparently, they managed to really expand their army a lot, while the Russians were still fighting it out with their professional contractor soldiers. So they had a kind of limitation on manpower. And we should remember that back then there was the Ukrainians were focusing on Kherson. There was a big battle on Kherson, and the Russians pulled out a lot of troops from Kharkov to fight in Kherson. They thought the main effort was in Kherson. And suddenly the Ukrainians saw a window of opportunity to really attack in Kharkov, and that was lightly defended.
Of course.
And I mean, I have to give it to the Ukrainians that they managed to pull it off. And they really routed the Russian forces which were there. It was really not quick at all. What was very interesting, I will finish. What was very interesting is that it was mostly an infantry battle. There were some BMPs or whatever, but mostly infantry, light troops. So that's my take.
Well, and Rubu, like, I agree with everything you just said, and like, if I were on the opposing side, I'd be very like, I would love this, right? Like, because someone like lightly defended, a situation, and they took advantage of it, and no one can take that away from the Ukrainians. They took advantage of a lightly defended situation. But here's the thing is, like, now the Russians are in full war mode. So try it again. 1 year
passed, and there has not been another Kharkov offensive.
You're right.
This is a one-off.
Yeah.
Doug, you're actually making a good point. "Quote unquote," try it again. They did try it again. They tried it in Zaporozhye.
Because I mean, everybody. I mean, I can remember when it was going on. We talked about like, why are they even doing this? It's like they should be defending, but it was like a PR stunt. Like, we're going to hold Bakhmut, or we're going to take the power plant, or we're going to take Snake Island. I think it was one of the first times they,
Right.
made a big hubbub about it and talked all about it. And
well, no, Rubru can, account for this as, like what happened when the French tried to go into Germany in World War One.
Yeah, they were slaughtered.
It's not a good time.
Doug, please, can you get on camera when you're speaking? I know you dropped off, so you kind of lost your camera. So I'm just, thank you very much.
Well, let's go ahead and move on now to, like you said, Kharkiv was a one-off, but it did have a partner, which wasn't the same thing as Kharkiv. It was a very different situation, but it had a lot of sort of similarities in that the Russians withdrew from Kherson about a month after they were routed out of Kharkiv. And this was first of all, from the perspective of just morale and the news media, this was a field day for the Ukrainians. But from the perspective of troops on the ground, I think that the story is a little bit different. So why don't you guys go ahead and talk about the Kherson withdrawal and how it was different and similar to the Kharkiv Rout?
I mean, the similarity with Kharkiv is like once the Russians were gone, they rushed in there with the camera crews and the special forces guys and took videos of them taking over buildings and putting up their flag and, capturing a Russian truck with flat tires that was left behind or whatever, showing you pictures of body armor or something, whatever that was left of all in the river. Like, I guess all the Russians swam away or whatever. The thing is they were able to withdraw pretty much all of their forces, other than what they had up front that was getting shot at, pretty much undamaged. And when they left, they blew the bridges. So that tells you right there, the bridges were blown by the Russians, which means they were done. And as soon as the bridges blew, the Ukrainians flooded into the area. And that's basically that.
One thing, the main difference that you could see between Kherson and Kharkiv is the troops. The VDB was in Kherson. The VDB destroyed a whole lot of vehicles and a whole lot of columns from Ukrainians in Kherson. The troops in Kharkiv were just logistics / reserve supply guys. They weren't expecting any fighting.
They were National Guard personnel.
Yeah, they were not trained to the same level as the VDB, and because they lacked true artillery and tanks, they couldn't stand against the Ukrainian push. So if you lack tanks and you don't have enough ATGMs or anti-tank weapons, you can't do anything. You are forced to retreat. And that's what happened in Kharkiv. But here, the VDV had a lot of good equipment. And you could see videos of small squads of VDB, 8 guys, ambushing a column of 4 tanks and destroying them. How? Because they had a lot of anti-tank weapons and they could set up ambushes. And that was before the era of full-on drone use. So doing those type of ambushes was a lot easier than it is today. And basically the VDB just pulled off.
Yeah. You're making one thing I would like to ask, because there is a very airy report that came from this offensive, and it's the story of the supposed use of strategic bombers along the front line to prevent the Ukrainians from advancing too rapidly and encircling Russian personnel. Do you guys buy that at all, or do you believe that was a story that was kind of created after the fact to make it appear as if the Russians had more control in the situation than they did?
Personally, I would say the latter, just because I think
have you even heard of this story?
I have heard of it.
What was the story now?
It's fake. Just because I don't think there was a lot of strategic air assets being used by the Russians outside of the very, very, very beginning, until more recently in the last couple of months when they finally, whittled down the Ukrainian air defense sufficiently that they're actually able to use their air assets. The Russians are
probably not true.
Yeah.
Because, if you think about it at that time, the only place I can remember them using strategic bombers was Mariupol. But if you look, at that point, it was completely surrounded. I don't think you could get – there was, it was 100 miles to Ukrainian lines if you got out of Mariupol. So, but anywhere else, no, there's probably no way, because back then they had way more S-300s still floating around and whatever else they got from the West. So I seriously doubt it. I mean, they're doing fabs now, but they didn't have fabs then. So
yeah, exactly. They didn't have the 250s or 500s in those times, so they could probably have done some missiles, or some type of strikes.
They didn't have the guided bombs. They had dumb bombs, and they used dumb bombs.
They had the dumb ones, but to use them at such extent where the Ukrainians were on the offensive and had a lot of anti-air capabilities, I really doubt it. Or we would have seen a lot more reports of downed Russian planes around the area.
Yeah, that, and you'd see an area that got carpet bombed by a backfire or a fucking bear. Because, I mean, think about it. Both those planes could carry at least the payload of the B-52. And if you're going to carpet bomb troops to save surrounded troops, you're doing a carpet bombing, which means you're going to have, you know, a kilometer by kilometer area that would just be obliterated. And you'd have dead body parts everywhere and vehicles everywhere, like an Ark-like mission in Vietnam. You know, you don't hear it coming, and all of a sudden, you know, you get hit with, like, you know, 100 Mark 82 500-pound bombs or whatever the Russian equivalent would be. And there's no way they're flying those over that at that point in that area. There's no way.
I think the MVP for Russia,
so.
The MVP for Russia in Kherson was probably mines, not airdrop bombs. That's, I think, what did the most damage to the Ukrainians that came in. I mean, you know, the Kherson withdrawal. This might sound like total cope, but in my view of it, it was actually quite a masterful operation. I mean, they got out of Kherson with pretty few casualties. I mean, and that's a huge thing to do. And they only had really, I think, 2 bridges, the one across the Novokhovkov Dam and the one in Kherson itself, maybe one more. And they were able to get most of their troops out and not take too many losses, which is pretty impressive.
Doug, wake up, Doug.
Doug is looking like the border guard in Balaklia, man.
That's so
Just
bad.
Sleeping.
No, but I mean, and if you think about it too, like they were worried about getting cut off by the dam being blown and stuff. So I mean, obviously they were thinking ahead, and it worked out for them. That was one of the times where the withdrawal they knew they probably had to do. They didn't want to do it. They even said that they didn't like doing it, but you know, it worked out great for them. They took minimal casualties. They got pretty much everything out. Later on, they blew the dam, and now all they have to worry about is just little harassing attacks. There's nothing going on down there. That's like a quiet part of the front, really, other than the exact spot where they're fighting.
If we do a quick little catch up to what the timeline we are at right now, we are officially after the Russian mobilization was declared. And we are right on the eve, right after the map you guys are looking at. Wyatt began to report it, but it's a little bit more challenging to find specific days reporting of the nightly massive airstrikes that the Russians kind of initiated right after this, where they began targeting power plants. What else did they target? Power plants, transformers, rail lines.
Railways, geothermal plants, or whatever, you know.
That's when Surovikin came up, right?
Yes, this is right when Surovikin came up, when he made that infamous statement, is we're going to have to give up some things, or something along those lines. He said there's going to have to be some changes made that some people may dislike. And people for a long time thought it was going to be the loss of Kherson, and that's exactly what it ended up being.
And I think Surovikin was kind of the fall guy for Russia in this, because they kind of knew strategically they had to give up the right bank of the Dnieper River. It was just not really tenable for them to hold it. And Surovikin was the guy that was in charge when that happened. And then after it happened, pretty soon after, he was no longer in charge. He was replaced by Gerasimov, if I recall correctly, as the leader of the SMO. But you're right, the Surovikin was an Air Force guy, and his whole thing was this giant campaign of cruise missile strikes against Ukraine's ability to keep themselves warm in the winter, which I think, looking back on it, we can say was a failure, because Ukraine didn't fail to keep the lights on in the winter. They did have internet and water and everything else. Their infrastructure did survive, I think that's kind of it just goes to show you the quality of Soviet infrastructure and of the Ukrainian people that are resilient.
Well,
the power of the Soviet power.
Yeah,
I would like to say just one thing regarding the strategic bombings and stuff. They did work to an extent. Why? Because Ukraine had to figure out a way to use their main railway lines, and they had mainly electrical trains. So the whole point of the bombardment of the geothermal power station or electrical grids was to avoid the quick mobilization of troops from the towards the front. So the back units to the front, they were held back more time whenever those strikes happened, because the trains wouldn't work, basically. So that was their main idea, to avoid, let them reconcile the line, make a good line with defenses while they retreated from Kherson, and avoid more rapid units from Ukraine to deploy and exploit any gaps that they find.
I think the mention of Surovikin is very important in this regard, and like previous people already said, like he made the decision to withdraw from Kherson, and that's very important because Russia actually annexed Kherson officially, so they gave up a political goal for a military gain, and that's something which should be forgotten, because before it was all about politics. Now the military took over as a kind of, and what Surovikin did was something really very sound, meaning that he did force preservation, build up, and basically Russia went on the defense and started building all these defenses from then on. So they really started building up, because until August 2022 they were on the offensive all the time. They were attack. And then became this black month of the Russian army, September, and then Surovikin came in, mobilization came, and then they started to be on a defense. And that was basically, he built the basis of the current situation, I would say.
I would agree. I would definitely agree. And we saw that extended not only through the airstrikes, but we saw that in the building of the what we call now the Surovikin line. He kind of forced a military restructuring. I wouldn't say restructuring in the sense of like they changed everything, but definitely a change of focus, at least in the short term, for the Russian goals. And what I have mapped right here, by the way, is the 1-year anniversary marked here for the conflict, February 24th, 2023. And as you guys can see, you can imagine this. I'm going to mess up the map here. This is around the time we had this drama, if you guys remember, with Transnistria, where there was this supposed claim that Ukraine was going to move on Transnistria, which I personally never bought, but maybe some of you would like to speak on. We saw the initial buildup and push towards, let me zoom in here, this infamous little shithole, known as Bakhmut. Did I just lose Bakhmut in the...
No, you're good.
No, we're right here.
Yes, Bakhmut.
This is the beginning. We're not getting super deep into it, but this is absolutely the initial phases of it. If I can get a little closer for us. There we go.
Well, Bakhmut, the attacks around Bakhmut was the main story all the way going back to pretty much as soon as the Kherson Withdrawal was complete. Yeah. Bakhmut was the main focus. So from October of 2022 until I think it was finally captured in March or April or May of 2023, for about 6 to 8 months, it was the main story. And like you said, Alan, we just jumped from the October map to the February map, and the only change has been around the vicinity of Bakhmut. So, of course, we got to talk about it. This was the big battle, the big fortress.
This is where we saw the infamous World War I comparison photographs, if you have seen those. No, but you laugh, but that's truly how hellish it was. It was muddy. It was horrible. It was awful. I mean, probably some of these photos that Wyatt has tagged are exactly what they lead to. Probably not, but I mean, the sentiment still stands. This was a slog for both Wagner and the Russian military, as well as for the Ukrainians, who had dug in so unbelievably deeply. I still remember watching a headcam video of Ukrainian soldiers right here as they were being shelled while the Russians began to advance across the bridges that, as you can see, even on this map here, are being reported as being destroyed 1 year into the conflict. Now, I think the big question that, since this is such a polarizing topic, a lot of Ukrainians may bring up is, why did it take Russia nearly 9 months to take one city? And what is the importance of this city anyway, if it's so important? Because a lot of people will say it was, it's a tiny city in the middle of, if we zoom out, a bunch of farmland. So what do you guys think? And I would like to input my comment as well after you guys are done.
First things first, we should not gloss over Zaporozhye and Ugledar in January 2023. Because
that's right.
think
I can pull that map
Bakhmut
up if you
falls
wish.
in the same timeline, because I started making videos about Bakhmut from January. That was when the real push began, and you saw 3 sectors which were kind of activated by the Russians, because everybody expected after the mobilization that there would be a big Russian offensive, which never materialized. But the Russians, they did make a push in Zaporizhzhia, which they aborted after 1 week or something like that. And there was this slaughter at Ugledar, which was also kind of like a big failure. But Bakhmut was kind of different with Wagner. But okay, that's all I want to say. Sorry.
I could say for the Vuhledar area were mainly BDVs, and stories I've heard is that the VDV was not loved by their superiors because they retreated from Kherson. So some units that were in Kherson were sent to Vuhledar and said, "Here are your tanks, here's your objective, good luck." And they just sent them there. Those are some stories I've heard from military guys. But I don't believe it. It's more like they made a plan to take Vuhledar and they overestimated how well defended and well supplied with artillery it was. And back to like Bakhmut, it was a very slow grind. And to answer your question, why it took 8 months is because Russians actually secured the flanks before going in the city. They did not go in the first time they were like closing in on the city. They first moved to Soledar, Krasnohora, Vodyan. They also get Klishivka, and they tried to take Ivanivske, but always failed to. Opitsne as well. They secure all the flanks around Bakhmut. And why did they do that? Because they know if they don't do that, Bakhmut will be well supplied, and it will be hell for them to even take some parts of the city and maintain it. And if we go fast forward to today, they still have some of those flanks secured, and Bakhmut is still in Russian control, or Artemyevsk is how they call it now. But if you don't secure the flanks first before going in, you end up wasting a lot of resources and a lot of manpower, and that the Russians simply do not want to give up in such a way.
So what makes this city so important, other than, of course, the Soledar salt, which is just world-class?
What it makes important? Roads.
Yep. Roads.
Just the road connection.
Look on this map. Look on the map, guys. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 highways that come out of this city. This is a junction that Wyatt, if you guys watched Wyatt's videos since the very beginning, he called that Bakhmut would be a huge battle from March of 2022 because he knew that this crossroads would be extremely important for the Ukrainians to hold. And that's exactly what we saw happen. The crossroads here and supply lines that were basically removed from the Ukrainian capacity to spread out their forces is exactly what resulted, some people say, in what's happening even today, as what we're seeing in Avdiivka. But of course, this is a time when Avdiivka was much more well defended. you guys want to move on to the next step, or do you guys still have another step you'd like to take after the conclusion of Bakhmut?
I personally,
I don't think.
Oh, yeah. I thought that Bakhmut was important because Zelensky said that there would be no more Ukrainian city falling in Russian hands, and I think in that regard, Bakhmut was a Russian victory because they proved him wrong. And but personally, I think Bakhmut is perhaps on the map important, but everybody expected that the Russian would push on to Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, which they didn't. So, yeah, it is just, I think, symbolic, but well, that's my take.
All right. I would also like to know.
I think I just want to say, I think the most important thing about Bakhmut, and this is unfortunately not something that we're ever going to, or not something that we're going to know for at least a few more years, what were the actual casualties there, right? Because if you think about it, there's the Ukrainians were shoveling men into Bakhmut, and and this is a horrible word, but they called it the meat grinder, right? Because the Russians were shelling it from all sides. It was utterly destroyed. The roads going into Bakhmut for a long time were under fire control, right, going through Kromove and Ivanivske. It was a very difficult situation. But even still, the Russians didn't take Bakhmut until I think it was March or April. And even then, it wasn't the Russian regular forces either. It was Wagner force that ended up capturing Bakhmut.
Yeah, for that point, I think it comes back to what Ru says is mainly as well political, because having that many troops in Bakhmut and supplying it and making sure it doesn't fall and pulling reserve after reserve battalion after special units after foreign volunteers, it doesn't make any sense in a military tactic way. If your city is surrounded, your roads are almost cut off, you just leave it as is or put some resistance and you pull away. Why? Because it's more important to conserve the people that are good fighters and experienced fighters than the men, than the city or the terrain. What the Ukrainians did is they pulled at the last minute some experienced troops that were still alive, but they also took a beating in Bakhmut, and the reservists, so the mobilized Ukrainians, stayed in Bakhmut until the end, and then they died. Why? Because they promised them, hey, we'll come back to you. So they didn't. Surprise. But yeah, that's more or less what Bakhmut, and how many casualties? I would say a lot, like too many for such a small area.
I think they were talking like 40,000. So,
probably.
If you think over 10 months, especially towards the end, that's when it probably would have spiked because of the brutality of it. But that's reasonable, especially
also,
when you think
there is something. You are right, Vaun. The brutality did spike, and this is something a lot of people don't remember. Wagner had a series of their personnel executed bluntly. That's what happened. And Wagner made a statement saying, we are no longer taking prisoners. And for the last 3 weeks, if you guys remember, of the fighting in Bakhmut, there were no prisoners taken. There were no Ukrainian prisoners taken up until the last couple city blocks were taken. And then ultimately we saw it kind of blink out, and that's it.
And I don't want to.
It was truly
look at all the coffins Prigozhin was boxing up. There's fucking truckloads.
Yeah.
And if it's true that it was 40,000 casualties over the course of about 8 months, that's something like 5,000 casualties a month, or something like 150 people per day casualties. Just to put that in perspective, I think that's pretty comparable to the amount of people that got killed in the Gaza attack on October 7th, which I don't want to get into. But imagine that happening every day for almost a year. That's what Bakhmut is like, just to put things in perspective.
Also, Bakhmut saw the introduction of a lot of new weapon systems from the Russians. The thermoblast weapons, right? They were first used in Bakhmut. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, thermobar. Yeah. Those flamethrower weapons, they were used in Bakhmut for one of the first times, if I recall correctly. They were starting to be used in the buildings, and that would be hell for anyone in there. Like, it's not just a heat, it just burns the air. The amount of casualties from that would have been huge, just from standing inside the building. So yeah, that Bakhmut was brutal.
When you look at how at the end there they were dropping all the buildings, I mean, it's going to take years to clean that place up, and those basements are just full of dead bodies. Just because, I mean, they fought hard. I mean, they got trapped, and then they're dropping buildings. I mean, there's probably so many dead motherfuckers buried under Bakhmut. I don't think people even know.
Yeah, it looks like Detroit. I'm kidding.
Reasonable.
Yeah. But I think that we can close off on the Bakhmut chapter. It was eventually captured, finally, after many, many, many months, and the war finally moved on to something new. And as soon as Bakhmut fell, everybody started talking, including the Ukrainians, strangely enough. They started talking all about their coming spring and summer counteroffensive. Now, the first question I want to ask about this is, why would you talk about your offensive? I mean, do you guys remember that video that they made where they were
trailer?
They had a bunch of trailer for the counteroffensive where they all put their fingers up and said shh. And I just thought that's a little bit silly because you're literally talking about it by putting your finger up on your face. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I think
what are you trying to do here?
That came out after it started, like, because people were asking about casualties and actual success. And that's why they started doing that. Like, don't talk about it because it wasn't going well.
No,
but even before
that came out before.
But they had a bunch, where they were showing Azov do assaults and shit like that.
Well, I mean, they were openly talking about it. You know what I mean? This wasn't some kind of secret. I mean, you'd think that you'd want to hold some element of surprise, but no. I mean,
well, you think about like Afghanistan. I mean, the Taliban didn't say when they're going to go on offensive, but everybody knows when fighting season is in Afghanistan because of the weather. So I mean, they could, most people assume spring, summer's coming, the ground will be dry, maybe Ukraine will try to make a move, and you'd be like, we'll see, we'll try to figure it out. You don't have to worry about that because Ukraine, hell yeah, we're going to make a move, and this is when we're going to do it, and this is where we're going to do it, and we're going to have all this shit to do it with. It's like, I mean, people might be able to figure out you're going to do something, especially with all the ISR. You'd see the Russians or whoever getting built up. But, they felt the need to, over-advertise. And then think about it. They overhype it. They over-advertise. They oversell it. And then it's an epic failure.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about where the counteroffensive was, right? So, of course, we know that there was a lot of fighting in Bakhmut, actually, against the flanks of Bakhmut, which they did push back. But the majority of the fighting was around Robotine, around going for Tokmak. So if you were a Ukrainian general, or let's say an American general, before the counteroffensive, and that you have to do a counteroffensive, where would you do it? Is Zaporizhia, is Robotine the best choice, or were there other choices?
Fuck no.
What do you
don't attack into open ground like that. But that's the problem with Western mentality. Is they overestimated their capabilities, underestimated the Russians, and they believed too much in their successes or quote-unquote failures from the Middle East. They only experience generals or high-ranking officers from the West. They haven't fought an actual war against a nation that's able to defend themselves as the Russians or Ukrainians since forever. They're most likely dead already, right? Last wars they've been fighting are guerrilla wars or regime-changing wars. And in regime-changing wars, you go in with a big-ass unit, full-on support, and just destroy everything in one day or a couple of weeks, and you're done. Blitz, change the regime, stay there, occupation, and you're good. They haven't done anything like Ukraine or fortifications for at least 60 years. They haven't learned to do it. I went to an officer school. We don't learn how to deal with that shit. We don't learn. Well, we have the manuals, but we never practice them, right? We have Soviet-era manuals about a Soviet invasion coming from the north of our country, and we learn more or less that, but we moved on and we believed the war was more asymmetrical, like we saw in Afghanistan. So none of them were prepared to do anything like this. And they just had an idea that the most strategic point for Russia was the land bridge between Crimea and Russia. What do you do? Cut it off. But they didn't went far up ahead and say, yeah, no, that's the way to defend it. The Russians are waiting for us. 2 open grounds. If you see to the roads, tell me which roads are you going to take?
Yeah.
Just
before
anyone answers this, I would like to say one thing. In this image you see, by the way, I don't know if you guys can see it because maybe it's just bad quality. In the corner, it says all of the pre-2022 fortifications have been removed from the view of this map, which means this is only what was built in 1 year.
Yeah. And the U.S. and
there's literally nowhere where someone in Ukraine's position has any business trying to penetrate. You know, maybe closer to
this is where the offensive
south of Donetsk and west, where there's a thinner area. But I mean, the fact that that's what they've done in a year. I mean, look at that. There's literally nowhere. I mean, and if you were able to do it, you know it's going to cost a lot to do it, and you know what you're going to have to do. Sending 2 Leopard mine clearers down to try to get through that. Are you fucking serious? And some MRAMs with mine clearers? I mean, like if I was a Ukrainian general and I had to do it, I mean, you know, I would have used the Su-24s. I would have used my ATACMs. I would have fucking fucked up Tomahawk, all the brigade headquarters, anything I could find that was related to supplies or commo, any kind of fortifications that were like permanent that I knew people were at, which I would be able to figure out because I have the best ISR in the world. But what did I do? Oh, let's go bomb a naval academy building, or let's go blow up some ships that were in dry dock that weren't even fighting. I mean, they have some capability, but they don't use it. I mean, why aren't you using your ATACMs to take out these tactical targets? Why aren't you using your HIMARS? You know, I mean, they waste their good shit on stupid things. I mean, and now look at it. I think somebody was saying there hasn't been a Storm Shadow attack since like the 14th or something. So, I mean, did they lose them all? Did they run out? Did the Russians bag all the planes or damage them enough that can launch the Storm Shadow that's off the table now? Or did they run out?
The problem with how Ukraine chooses its target, well, it's not actually a problem, but the thing how Ukraine chooses its targets by receiving a target package from the intelligence sources, and they tell him, but they get it.
Shitty people.
And the problem is Russia has good air defense. Russia has a good capability to intercept anything that's coming to certain objectives. They know the brigade headquarters is extremely well defended. And the times that they have tried, but even when they go for it, it just gets shut down. It doesn't do the desired effect.
I mean, I just think it's a misallocation of the resource and the asset, because if you're going on the offensive, then you support the offensive. You don't start an offensive with basically minimal artillery support, which is a fact, and basically zero air support, especially if you're claiming to be a NATO-trained army with NATO equipment. That's not how we fucking operate, at least not when I was in the Army. I was in my M1, I had F-16s, F-15s, A-10s, Apaches, fucking MRLSs, you know, all kinds of fucking artillery, gas trucks. I mean, this is like the offensive that should have never been an offensive. It's just another fucking showboat operation that gets a bunch of dudes killed. It's just like getting in a raft and attacking the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant 27 times.
That was hilarious.
Just a waste of men on an operation. And look where they went into Robotny. It's all valves that you can sit up on top and just shoot down into them, which they've been doing.
Yeah,
So this is from June 9th. I'm going to go day by day, and you guys tell me to stop if you want me to. But just keep talking.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I would have chosen a place to make this offensive, I would never choose a fucking planes to do an offensive. Why? Because Russians have better artillery, better observations, better planes at this point in time. Why are you going to do in the planes? You go planes if you have the fast attacking vehicles. There is not well defended. You have air superiority and you have the logistics to support you. Ukraine had none of this, literally. The Russians had everything. So why are you choosing that place? Just go ahead. Maybe if you zoom out the map.
Yep.
A bit.
I mean, it's like they took the worst possible option. And I was listening to a guy, and he was talking about that he's almost getting the impression that in the Pentagon you have military people and civilian people with no experience whatsoever in the military coming up with plans that are getting approved for the Ukrainians, because this shit don't make no sense what they're doing. I mean, everything they've been doing is just a lashing out, desperation plays that gets a bunch of dudes killed and has no good outcome for Ukraine. Really,
even further away,
realistic.
all the way up.
Yep.
So I mean, they killed 30 tanks last week.
Also, there
deal.
is something we definitely should talk about.
Oh, yes. See, this is actually Wyatt's answer to the question of where would you commit an offensive if you were a Ukrainian general. he said that you should attack directly into Russia and go towards Moscow. And I mean, I see the logic because, like, I mean, what are your options, right? Okay, Zaporizhia at least has a high reward. If they were to capture Tokmak and Melitopol somehow, I mean, that would cut off Crimea, and then you could destroy the bridge. I mean, that would be huge. It would be huge, right? But where else? Are you going to go across the Kherson, across the Dnieper River? Not a chance. Are you going to attack into the Donbass? I mean, you know, maybe you'll have some success, but it would be extremely slow. Are you going to attack in North Lugansk? I mean, you know, that's pretty much empty land there, but there's no reward like there would be in Zaporizhia. So what does that leave? I mean, maybe attack Russia directly and try and make the Russian citizens feel the pain. So I think that was the logic there behind the attacks into Russia. Well, please go ahead.
Yeah. Wait. Are you sure you and I are talking about the same thing? What I marked is the Wagner.
Prigozhin. Yeah.
Oh, the Wagner. I thought you were talking about the incursions of the DRG. Oh, yeah. Right. No, but you're right. Yeah. I mean, Wagner also attacked Moscow. So there you go. That was something.
Yeah. Well, that was an episode.
The fifth column.
But yeah, that was crazy.
If you have to attack any place as an Ukraine general, I would say, yeah, it's tough. Could you zoom into the Luhansk area a bit?
Yep, I got you. Luhansk specifically up here.
Yeah, just a bit into Luhansk, like.
All right, just say north, south, east, west.
Yeah, that part.
Yeah,
right. So you see here, you could do an attack. What Western officials have never learned to do, and they don't have in their manuals, is you do a full front attack, and that's what the Russians used to do. Attack all over the front, see which parts succeed, and pull more men in there. That's how you take land against the Russians. You do the same tactics as them. You cannot do a full-on attack in 3 points or 2 points. Concentrate your forces in there and push, because you get obliterated. You get the 50+ enemies vehicles destroyed in a 1 by 1 kilometer area. You get the day one of the offensive for Ukraine. If you do that, you'll be destroyed. If you do the NATO tactic, NATO standard tactic, which is push along some concentrated arrows, and here is more World War One-ish or World War Two-ish tactics. Yeah, you need to just push across the front line, see where it works, pull more men into it. And if it doesn't, just keep going recon by force into every single part, put more pressure, make the Russians decide to retreat some parts and retake the terrain. But they don't. They go for the big offensive with the big arrow moves that almost never works.
Would you mind if I zoom back into Robotina?
Go ahead, Ru.
Yeah, I made a video before the offensive about the possibilities of the offensive, and I came up with a scenario which is a kind of could have perhaps, if everything went well, worked. And I was thinking about not Zaporizhia, but a little bit to the east at Ugledar, because like you said, at Donetsk, you have this kind of pre-war fortifications. So that's a kind of a no-brainer. And in Zaporozhye, you have the best Russian defenses. But in between, there was a kind of like a weak spot at Ugledar. And what I've done is like first spoiling attacks, like you make a jumper crossing and you attack at Zaporozhye. You attack a little bit different places, and then you crash into Ugledar. And my idea was that if the Russians really would have given a bad show, that could have a cascading effect, because you would have perhaps go towards Mariupol, something like that, or Berdyansk. But instead of going actually to there, you would have kind of like moved parallel to their defenses. And then the Russians have to choose, like, are they going to stay in their defenses or are they going to move away? And of course, you gamble a little bit on that they will go away, and that it have a kind of cascading effect, and that the retreat would have caused some chaos. But that's, yeah, again.
I really like that. Right. I think that could, I think that's one of the best options that the Ukrainians had. Alan, if you can go back to that ISW map with the that shows all of the Russian fortifications.
Gentlemen, if I can just interject, I wanted to ask you if we can go back to the map, because I wanted to ask a question that I myself have been pondering, and I am not nearly as versed as you guys, but since I am asking, there might be quite a lot of people watching this who may be in my position wondering. And that is, so for example, most of you guys have already pointed out Robotina sounds like, it seems to me also like an insane starting point for a variety of reasons. But Ugledar is also one of the points that seem to be, it's also very self-evident and contested, right? Now, the big arrow moves, yes, they're not going to move. I agree with Felipe. The Ukrainians are obviously not in a position to do that, at least not yet, maybe not never. But when it comes to, like, you want to have a strategic objective, like Zaporozhye, and that also makes sense, right? You want to be aiming for that. That's what they've been projecting in all the way. But all the while, they still have, the Ukrainians, I'm trying to look this from the Ukrainian perspective. You still have to take into consideration that your main perpetuator of war is actually optics and external support. And you have to make that fit with the timeline where, or the time is against you, in which the more you burn, the more it won't matter. At some point, it won't matter. And so if I were to be Ukrainian commander, I would be thinking that I could achieve, operational success if I were to be moving along the Dnieper, where I could use the Dnieper as a flank tactically. It will make it easier for my commanders. I could focus on taking the strongholds around there, and my losses wouldn't be so tremendous. Maybe I could, and I'm putting this into context because at this point we are also seeing that the Russians are about to be, they're basically making the Ukrainian offensive the Ukrainian defensive, right? How are you, and the Ukrainian commanders, I would assume, expect this. So without rambling too much, why hasn't the Dnieper been utilized more, for example? Like, why are you guys aiming for the more strategic goals? Like, why would the Ukrainian commander not choose, for example, the approach that I suggested here?
Well, so you're suggesting that they attack along the Dnieper so that they can benefit from the support of their forces on the opposite side of Dnieper? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that they try to operationally utilize the Dnieper as a flank that enables them to, like, so they can prioritize their forces.
That's actually something I had discussed with these guys for a long time. And the possible use of, basically, let me go back to the map here. Let me display the map. One moment. There was a long running theory, because if you remember, in the middle of May, there was kind of positional combat going on here in Kamyansk. And for a period of time, there was a genuine belief that either the Russians would launch an offensive north along the Dnieper, utilizing the exact strategy you had, or vice versa, the Ukrainians would launch an offensive southward, which they actually did. They attempted to launch an offensive southward, staying to the Dnieper kind of reservoir and advancing. Ultimately, what we would have imagined to be their goal would be Energodar, to kind of push this flank out this way and, of course, threaten everything south. But we didn't see that happen because the Ukrainians, even if they tried to use the reservoir as a flanking, as a way to protect their flanks, the Russians were just waiting for it. This was one of the main lines that the Russians had been sitting here and waiting to happen. This, Rabotina, and probably parts of Velikaya Novosilka, which, if you guys can forgive me for the jarring hops in the map real quick here, which is right up here in this area. The Russians really believed the Russians would be coming from this way, and here's the city itself. And they did, and the Russians kind of called it. Now, whether you want to say it's because the Russians knew the Ukrainian plans, maybe they had a leak, maybe they have people on the inside, and it's probably safe to say that there are people on the inside that the Russians have. Spies are probably everywhere. But actually, I would interrupt myself. There's one thing we did not cover, and that was the leaking of specific documents. I believe it was in March. Vaun may know about this as well, from a specific airman in the United States, which coincidentally had a lot of not only the positional planning for the Western and Ukrainian forces, but even their makeup and possibly even their objectives. Do you guys remember this at all? That leak of the young man who was arrested, the airman?
Yep. Yeah, I remember.
Some people have gone as far to say that his leaks, whether purposeful or not, directly led to the failure of the entire Ukrainian summer offensive, because it allowed the Russians to essentially confirm the exact thoughts that they had.
Well, think about it too. Like right after that stuff came out is when you started seeing all the big strikes on the depots that were massive, that people speculated, like, was that the depleted uranium, Yes. I mean, there was a whole bunch of stuff, there were strikes on command posts, rumors of people being dead, like Zaluzny. I mean, there was stuff hit around Kiev, bunkers, commands, in control places, and then like you said, right after that, I mean, the offensive really never got going after that whole.
I mean, look at it. I have it pulled up 1 month in. The line has not changed. This is what you're looking at is the 1 month, because it started on the 8th of June. You're looking at the 30th day of it. The line has not moved. Let's see if we can zoom in here. It started here approximately, and they made it maybe 3-4 kilometers. They had not even made it to Robotina yet, which is just horrifying to imagine the amount of bodies that have to probably be in this region right here between these two roads. It's got to be terrifying.
You also have to remember, for all the back headquarters and command posts and all those strikes, that's right around the time Russia had the 5-250s, 500s, 1000, and 1500s. They start to drop them and use them more. And also, we start to see videos of Russian drones filming Lancets hitting at 70 plus kilometers.
That was a little bit later, actually. That was a little bit later. Yeah.
Okay, but we started to see Russian drones improve around that time in the offensive. So the problem is, if we see video of it now, it means Russia probably had the surveillance drones already a couple of weeks before. And then just now the new Lancet models arrived and then started to upload those videos. But to have the capability to see that far out, even if it's just 10 kilometers inside Ukrainian lines, you could see the whole offensive planning out. And you don't need any leaks. You just can, if you just have enough surveillance and drones, and Russia does have enough drones, you can just see any movements of troops. Hey, these guys are coming in. There are a lot of troops coming in. There's a lot of movement.
Yeah.
A lot of vehicles.
Think about it. All those airstrikes hit and the offensive that was all hyped up just really never got going. And then they were talking about the weather and delays and stuff. It's
No, guys, it was the bushes.
Blowing the fuck up.
Guys, it was the bushes. And no one remembers that when the Ukrainians complained it was because the bushes were too large.
Yeah, the bushes made the tanks stuck. You know.
The shrubbery, yes.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to go ahead and move on to the current day. I mean, where we are today.
Yep. I'm taking us day by day at this point, so I'll have us hold up
and,
a minute here.
And we're getting pretty close now to the current day because nothing has really happened
now.
as far as the Ukrainian offensive. The Russians have, there's been some motion around Avdiivka very recently.
Yeah.
What do you guys? So I'll go ahead and throw two questions out to you guys. First of all, what is the prognosis on Avdiivka? Do you think that that's going to be extremely impactful? And secondly, on a larger scale, where do you see this war going forwards?
I could say for war going forwards, 1 year and a half, 2 years more. Ukraine still has enough people to just play defense and hope Russia to tire out. It's not gonna end up in just a couple of months or a few months. It would take at least 1 more year and more battles like Bakhmut and now Avdiivka, coming into your first question, would be a smaller Bakhmut probably. It would shape up the operational level and then the strategic and tactical level to allow Russians to move in deeper into Donetsk region without the need to circumvent the stronghold. So it's just shaping up battles for now, but they also want to make them as costly as possible for the Ukrainians. That's what I think.
I would definitely agree. I think we'll definitely be seeing a shift in the Russians' strategy moving forward around Avdiivka, because a lot of people thought it would be simply erased off the map with bombing, but I will say we could be looking at a smaller Bakhmut instead, where the Russians kind of take step by step to try to overwhelm the city.
I think.
Go ahead. There's one more thing I wanted to say, but I forgot. So please go ahead. I'll try to remember.
I mean, I think with Avdiivka, there's no reason to do a Bakhmut style thing. I think they could just surround it and then just starve them out, shell them, cut them off. And I mean, it's a good chance to bag a lot of dudes. Maybe there'll be a lot of surrenders. And what was the other question?
Is where do you see the war going in general?
I mean, it's just going to keep going bad for Ukraine. I mean, you look at Avdiivka is a spot that's going to get bad. I think the Kremenaya Forest is about to get bad because if you go with the attrition strategy, of killing Ukrainian troops and probably wanting to kill the worst ones first, like the nationalists and all the hardcore guys, there's a lot of those guys like Foreign Legion, Azov and shit up there. And they're getting to the point where if you look at where the Russian lines are, up around the Kremenaya, they're getting backed up against that river, and the Russians are starting to creep around the ends, and it's getting to the point where these guys are going to have to, probably withdraw, and then they're going to be trying to withdraw across these rivers, with the Russians pressuring them. So I think that's another area that could get pretty interesting. And then you got Kupiansk. I mean, I do agree the war could last another year. But with winter coming and the potential for some major defeats being more obvious, like Avdiivka, like if it gets totally cut off, I mean, there's a chance they could break this winter. I mean, it's fucking miserable out there.
Yeah.
So
the other thing about the winter,
there's always that untenable thing, if Avdiivka gets surrounded and something else happens, let's say Kupiansk falls, or if you watch. Wyatt's video, I think there's a lot of cities, it was History Legends. There's a lot of cities that are going to be vulnerable here if a few things go the right way. once winter sets in. So there's just a lot of potential, I think, like always.
The other thing about the winter is that, last winter there was always, around this time last year, we were talking about the Surovikin air campaign against the power transformers and the power grid. And now that wasn't successful. But now all of the accumulated damage from that and all of the excessive load that the power grid has had to handle because of whatever damage it did sustain, all the accumulated wear and tear. And we do know that the Russians are not running out of missiles. I mean, they continue their cruise missile strikes against targets in Ukraine.
They actually have stopped recently, interestingly enough.
I mean, they go on and off, right? But I would, they're probably trying to build up some more right now, but they certainly haven't run out, because there have been periods where they stop for a month or two as well, and then they start again. If the Russians decide to do another big campaign against power lines, power transformers, power stations, it's possible that the Ukrainians may feel a lot of pain this winter. And we have to remember, last winter was a very mild winter. Now, I'm no climate scientist, but it's possible that this winter is going to be a lot worse, right? If that is the case, especially with the situation in Europe, with reducing their gas supplies that they have, especially with what's going on in the Middle East, we might see a situation where it's very, very difficult to get energy in Ukraine this winter, and that might have a cascading failure effect. Maybe.
If we look at the war from a large perspective, I mean, in February last year, I also believed, just like Mark Milley, that the war would be over in days or maybe weeks, but it didn't.
But and then never said that.
No,
you got to get that out there. A lot of people think he did.
But to be honest, I thought that, and I was wrong. And also in the summer of last year, I thought it would be over before the end of the year or at the end of the year, and also because of this missile offensive against the power grid. And it didn't. And now we are almost at the end of 2023, so I have become very apprehensive to see the end of the war, and especially the end of the Ukrainian army. I mean, they have proven so much resilience and so much, to be honest, courage and fighting spirit. I mean, we cannot discount it. That's just a fact. And they managed to expand their army. They managed to persevere despite having less air power, less artillery, less.
They've managed to rebuild their entire army. They've managed to rebuild their entire army multiple times at this point.
Yes, we have to give it to them that they have been very resilient, very brave, courageous. I would say don't discount them so easily. I mean, this can go on, and that's also why I think that the Russians will not open a major offensive, because that's what history legends today predicted. And I think, to be honest, so far the Russians have done local attacks, but no big offensives this year. And I don't think they will not do that anytime soon, because they want to preserve their power. They want to build up their power.
Yeah, and he talked, like history legends talked about what we talked about before too, with where the Russians are just putting pressure everywhere and just kind of feeling things out, And like I don't mean like this winter is going to be these big offensive. It was just, if they continue this pressure, the way things kind of are looking, there's things break the right way. There's a chance that there's several cities up in that area that might be more vulnerable during the winter just because the way things go. But that we're not there yet, and they haven't gotten to where that becomes a possibility yet. So just got to wait and see. But it wasn't going to be like big offensive. It was going to be more like opportunity to get these places if things went the right way.
The other factor is drone warfare. We alluded to this a couple of times throughout the stream, but early on, drones. Yeah, well, early on, I think drones were not hugely relevant, but every single month it seemed like we started seeing more and more videos and more usage of drones on both sides. I think at this point, both of the armies have totally adapted to drone warfare, and there's drones that are covering that are taking video of every single inch of the front line at this point. I think that's really changed the character of this war. It's made it a lot slower because it's extremely difficult now to mass forces in any one location without, having a bunch of drones pay you a little visit with some grenades, right?
They were saying around Robotny, there was a Ukrainian soldier that was complaining that, in that particular area, they couldn't go out on foot in a vehicle or anything without being spotted within 10 minutes and attacked. So, and that was months ago. So you can imagine that's multituded up every month.
Just like gotten better and better at it.
Attacks.
Yeah.
And this is something every army in the world needs to learn.
Oh, and the Western Army will not learn it. I guarantee you that. But the thing is, Russia ramped up production of FPVs and also Lancets and new Lancet models, which have huge ranges, around 50 to 70 kilometers. And Ukraine has lost a lot of electronic warfare assets. So now they are seeing better Lancets, more improved versions of it. Russia has talked to China to get some new models of drones, which have AI and reinforced learning to lock into a target and then follow it, even if the connection is lost with the user. So there's still lots of improvement being made to drones, and they have completely changed the battlefield. Before drones were in huge production, you could see 5, 6, 7 N777s in a line just shooting artillery. Now that you never see that nowadays. They have forced the Ukrainians to hide, and whenever they move, they're tracked. Same for Russians sometimes. Ukrainians still have drones and still use them. It's just that it's a bit less effective than the Russians because Russians have more numbers now than Ukrainians. But yeah, drones have changed a lot, and the problem is Western units or Western militaries will not learn about this, and they think drones are just too expensive for their simple infantrymen or tank crew, and electronic warfare for them is bullshit and it doesn't work. And I'm telling you this from personal experience because I finished my army training not too long ago, a couple of years back. And if you talk about them, about drones, their capabilities and stuff, they would just laugh at you because who cares? They're not important.
But now they're extremely effective.
They still don't care.
I think the first test of the Western military will be with Israel and Hamas because both sides have had a year and a half to see the evolution of drone warfare. So both sides, you would think, would develop counters as best they could based on their abilities. And they would also be amping up their drone production because they can see the benefit of it. I mean, especially for a group like Hamas, it's a low-cost way to hit the Israelis hard, especially if you can get a couple hundred of those things out there. I mean, that's not a lot. That's not a lot of money. I mean, all you could do is strap an RPG on them. I mean, if Israel takes a lot of damage from the drones, or Hamas and Hamas uses a lot of drones, then you'll see who learned the lessons and who didn't. But I mean, I think that's the first test to see if Western armies are going to pick up on the threat drones have become. I mean, especially in the last 6 months. I mean, Jesus, the FPV drone attacks are just insane.
Exponential. They're exponential.
Yeah, I mean, every month
back
I think
in May there were
like
40%. No. Back in May there were 40 videos released. In June it was something like 104, and then by August and September it was north of 500 videos a month. I mean, they are genuinely exponential.
When that report came out, they said, had gotten up to like 242, and then they said already halfway through September it was at 300 and something. Yep. So that by the end of the month it was over 500.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's like, did Israel or Hamas or any of these other people, are they get they're about to go into battle? Are they going to learn the lesson, or are they going to find out the hard way? Because I mean, like you said, you can't be. There's no excuse really, because Israel's got the money and the technology, and they've basically had a year and a half heads up that what can be done at low cost and is effective. And Hamas has been showing a weapon system that's cheap to build and pretty effective if you got trained people and you know how to use them. So we'll see.
May I remind you, gentlemen, that the topic of today was the Ukraine war. So, how about are you guys done with this? Because
I think we really have covered everything up until the current day. That was the main goal, to kind of do a summary of the entire conflict. I think you guys did it really well. I am. Why don't you guys do a round of closing, and then Vaun, you were alluding to Israel and Palestine. DPA has reporting on that as well. As you may have seen throughout this recording, people in the audience, this is based quite a lot of sourcing, and the sourcing is Defense Politics Asia. We also will be having something going on when it comes to Israel and Palestine. So, gentlemen, I think this sounds like a good time for us to stop the recording, and why don't we take a round of closing? Who would like to start? I can start us off. It was fantastic doing the maps for us. I hope that in the future we can keep doing more kind of deeper dives on to specific events through these conflicts. I would really love the opportunity to kind of take it a day by day with maybe some more people we could get to join the open mic, as well as some of the other panelists we didn't have on today, to really deep dive into the strategy and tactical, I guess, minutia, but that's some stuff some people really like, and as do I, and kind of really get into, you know, the day by day things we saw in this conflict, and as well as, if anyone's interested, doing other conflicts, things going on in Israel. I know there is some events going down in Africa as well as internationally that I'm sure would be really fun to cover. I plan on getting some extra software downloaded so that we can actually start drawing on the maps and allowing the other panelists to draw on the map directly what they're looking for. So I think that would be really, really fantastic. Other than that, I really appreciate you guys. Good job.
I'm just going to say, I really like this idea of doing a more, focused panel real quick. And I'd say just, I wasn't ready, I guess.
Well, let me just take it from here. I just want to say that if you guys are interested in DPA, go ahead and check them out on Patreon, and then you can get access to the archive of all the maps. You know what I think we should definitely do at some point after the war is over is make a supercut of all the mapping and the whole time lapse and everything. That'd be pretty cool. And check out. Yeah, right. No, and actually just take all of Wyatt's videos and just play them at like 100 times speed. Okay, the whole way through. No, but in any case, do check out Defense Politics Asia. Get on the open mic, you guys, if you want to get involved with this kind of thing. And we talk about a lot of interesting things, including the Ukraine war, including Israel and Palestine, as it's going to be happening pretty soon.
All right, I'll go. Yeah, I mean, I like this idea of doing the panel. I think it's really cool that we can focus on something. Today we wanted to do Ukraine. Obviously, we're going to cover Palestine, Gaza, and all that, and try to cover it fairly and unbiasedly and just analyze what's going on and what's going to happen. I mean, with everything going on, there's plenty to talk about on the military side. I mean, in some ways, we're in some uncharted waters. In other ways, we're on the edge of the cliff. I think most people that have been paying attention know. And what's at stake. There's a lot of chess moves being made. And if you're in the, if you like what you're seeing, like Archimedes said, support DPA, watch, like, share, subscribe, let people know. If you're in one of these areas where something's going on, come on the open mic and let us know what's going on, because we want people that are just regular people on the ground that can say, hey, this is what's going on, or this is what I heard. Or if you got family that lives over there that you talk to that can tell you what's going on. I mean, that's how we try to, find out what's going on and give people a more, I guess, realistic view of things, because you try to talk to people that are there in the area or the region. So I really like this idea, and like I said, we're going to do a lot of stuff because we obviously have a lot of stuff coming through. So thanks again. I enjoy the panel.
Well, yeah, I would like to take the opportunity to also thank for the opportunity, and the DPA community. It's great always to exchange thoughts with high minds. To be honest, everybody has their own niche speciality, something to bring in. also from different parts of the world, which makes it even more interesting, to be honest. So yeah, thank you very much. I have my own YouTube channel. I rebranded it as Armies and Battles. I also did some analysis on Ukraine with my own mapping using PowerPoint, by the way. But again, it works. So it was a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just seconding Rue's channel. It's really good. I'm a big fan.
Yep. And well, I would say lastly, thanks for watching the video. If you like these panels, yes, we all said subscribe to DPA, check him out. If you want to feature in these panels, just go to the open mic, and then you can come in here as well. I really like this conversation, a bit more focused panels. Let us know what you think. And yeah, we'll probably do Palestine and Israel next. That would be an interesting topic as well. And yeah, thanks a lot for having me, and cheers.
So, as I must say, it's so good for my coping to have finally 1 year into the open mic, I think, more or less. And what caused the open mic to occur? It was why I told you guys. I said it to the folks in the audience, and everybody knows it. It's Wyatt's impeccable reporting, concomitant with his astute geopolitical observations. And for the longest time, when the recordings have been going on here on the open mic, we have been trying to cover quite a lot on the geopolitics. I have been hosting quite a lot of them, and I am so grateful with. You know, this is kind of personal, so I kind of can't really word it properly, but I want you in the audience to understand that when I said from the outset, we are not lecturing you. This is what we see based on, you know, if you really want to comprehensively counter DPA, please make our day. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, you can also be here. The panelists here, they already did all my shtick, all my closing. This is the only reason I exist here, honestly, and they just took it away. But this is also exactly why I am so satisfied with this recording, and I hope you enjoyed this, you in the audience enjoyed this as much as I did. For here we are, 1 year in, thanks to the very wise decision of Wyatt to establish the open mic channel, where people were attracted to the quantity and quality of his work, concomitant with not just war reporting, as we have been covering now, but the geopolitical. You should understand, when I am saying, try to take on DPA, make our day, we know. Apart from that, thank you very much for watching the DPA Open Mic. We hope you like and subscribe, and all the other jazz that my fellow panelists have been doing. Bye-bye.